There is a reason why TSR and old school Dungeons and Dragons failed. It started collapsing the company after it brought out AD&D First Edition. Long before Second Edition ever hit the market, the company started falling apart, and the majority of its customer base left. While this did lift up the hobby, because most people purchasing games were not purchasing 2 or 3, the majority of people were young, they could dedicate their money to one game. That was really it. These were dedicated people in the hobby, and TSR started losing what I call dedicated customers. Those dedicated customers lifted up other games, like the vampire games or Millennium. So in a way, the collapse of TSR brought other games to life that now exist and have a history and multiple editions and whatnot because of the financing and backing they got from dedicated customers that left TSR after AD&D First Edition. There is something that failed with old school D&D, and I've never seen another game designer really truly understand the failure. Actually, most people from around that part of the hobby that like old school, they won't even admit that is what happened. And when you won't accept the truth, it's going to be hard to see what reality is. So you can't even see why that failed. Now the OSR, which was popular a number of years ago, without any real controversy, that whole division has started already flopping. It hit a peak and now it's going down. Now why is the OSR failing? The OSR has copied and pasted the gameplay from original D&D and AD&D First Edition, and they started pushing it. But that's the gameplay that collapsed the company TSR. Right? Before WotC ever took over D&D, there was a company called TSR. If you're new to this, that company TSR made the original D&D, the First Edition, and the Second Edition. That's why when you go study WotC, you'll find out they start off with a game called Dungeons and Dragons Third Edition. Now, as someone who had dreams of designing my own game, making my own game, I made, multiple games before I ever made my Neo TTRPG System. But I had a different look at the hobby because I was studying the hobby to see where things were, what the truth was, why something was successful, and why something failed. And unlike a lot of other people, I just looked at the truth for what it was. I realized in the hobby it doesn't matter if the minority is happy. For companies to exist and make all of us games and new products, and for that to be a continuous thing, the majority need to be appeased in some way. You can't just worry about the minority because a market simply cannot exist for a minority. Even the OSR is finding out that really quickly. You just can't have a long-lasting market, so the OSR is going downhill like TSR. So some games try to remedy this, but they don't even realize what they're fixing. They don't know that the ball has been dropped on this, and that even that a ball could be dropped on this. It's like you don't totally understand, right? A lot of games have failed for this reason, including AD&D First Edition and original D&D. I'm going to tell you what that is. Years ago, as I discovered so many things about the hobby and making games and designing my own games, I kept thinking I want to keep this stuff secret because I realized I knew stuff that even the TSR guys that worked back in the day didn't realize. Like, I started just cluing into things and thinking to myself, I want to keep this information to myself so other people don't know it, because if I tell other people this and they realize it and they apply this, they patch us up in their own games, it's going to benefit them right away. I'm going to tell you what drove people away from TSR and why WotC, no matter how terrible the editions are, why WotC has sold more, has achieved more in many ways than TSR did. Why can a game that is worse succeed over a game that is many would consider to be better? Why would that happen? Well, science tells us this. I'm going to clear the air. It's not hard to understand, but it's something that if you just didn't pick up on, if your common sense doesn't wrap your head around this, or you're in denial about the failure of TSR and the failure of AD&D. See, if you can't accept that AD&D First Edition is what killed TSR, if you can't accept that that game is what destroyed the company, you'll never get this. It will never make sense to you, right? Because you love that game. So I'm going to tell you something. Here's a common issue old school DMs would hear from players. They would hear it so much, it's a popular thing you hear old school DMs, even now to some degree, will come out and try to explain away. Like, DMs will have to explain how the game doesn't have to be a meat grinder. Why would old school DMs have to go around telling people the game doesn't have to be a meat grinder? It's because the majority of the customers back in the day called old school D&D a meat grinder. Now you might just say, well, they're weak. That's why they walked away. They're weak. Fair enough, but I want to tell you something. There's a study that happened many years ago. See, when we look at rats, some of their behavior is similar to ours in certain ways, and some of the medical field. So there's a lot of studies that go into rats that they try to predict these same things, similar things will happen with humans, right? So one of the studies they did were rats playing with each other. Like a smaller rat playing with a bigger rat, where the bigger rat could win every time. But they would notice something. In the play pair, where the bigger rat would win every time, the smaller rat stopped playing the game. Like outright stopped playing. So they would notice other bigger rats, they would have their smaller pairing rat with them play the entire time. So they're paying attention as to why. It's because the bigger rat, even though they could win every game, is allowing the other rat to win 30, 40, 50% of the time. And allowing the smaller rat to win is what keeps bringing the rat back to the game. See, the continuous loss is a hit for many reasons. For humans, it's psychological. You're attacking someone's ego. You're damaging someone in many ways. They will not like the continuous failure. See, a lot of people have egos. We just have to accept it. False, whatever. It's going to be there. So if you lay continuous failure down at their feet, they leave. What we find out is this is the majority of human beings. It's why video games were the tougher video games, they'll have a cult following, but they won't have a big following. They might even be able to make a good amount of money off a cult following if it's global and you're thinking that small percent equals out to millions of people. That can happen, but the point is that tough game still has only a cult following. Why? Because continuous failure has driven over 90% of people away from that game. It's quite obvious when you think about it. It's the continuous meat grinder failure experience that over 90% of old school customers had with AD&D First Edition that drove them from the game. It's so easy to understand. That's what killed it. It wasn't Second Edition. It's so obvious that First Edition and the grindy aspects of it, like, let alone you're failing all the time. Imagine, you really do read AD&D and you think you really are going to play the fucking warrior who fights the dragon under the fucking sun. That's what you've been told. That's what you've been pitched with AD&D 1. And you get in and you find out you're not a fucking hero at all. You're going to go fucking work in a dungeon like a fucking slave. And it's going to feel like a job, not like you're a hero adventuring. And then it's either you're going to be in the dungeon getting your ass kicked or you're going to be just outside the dungeon camping forever as you heal up very slowly. Right? Do you know how many people had that experience? That was over 90% of customers that had that exact experience with AD&D First Edition. Working slaves, no heroes, no fighting a dragon under the sun, nothing. And then you would get over 90% of AD&D First Edition DMs and old school DMs limiting like how far they'll play you. They play you up to a certain point and stop the game. AD&D First Edition DMs, the majority would either stop, a few would go as far as 10, most would stop at 8, and that's the game. That's it. Game's over there. So by the time you're capable of doing the things that you played the game, that you've invested your time into do, they take it away from you. So imagine if you're failing, the few times you might squeeze up to the top somewhere, when you finally get there, they say it's over. So imagine that experience being the overwhelming experience for the majority. What do you think drove TSR into the fucking ground? See, for you to get the majority, for a company to keep going, there has to be a reward system in some way. Leveling is one, but it's leveling means you survived. It's a victory reward in many ways. It's all about that stimulation. And that's what keeps that smaller rat continuously playing the game with the bigger rat. Right? Like, it's, unless you give them their victories, their rewards, their stimulation, you're fucked. And stimulation can't be hollow. That's another thing. The little rat has to feel like he's winning. It can't be like you just give something over for the stimulation. No, it can't be hollow. It has to feel like it's real victory. So you got to give stimulation that really pays off, and then you keep people coming back. WotC did that better. They just did it with a terrible game system, right? You want to do that with a better game system, but the power of doing it, even with a shitty game system when people have been denied for so many years, means even a shitty game system like what WotC made can end up being successful in a hobby where the customers are not being served by the market. That's another thing. A lot of people in the tabletop role-playing game hobby know nothing about business, even to this day in 2025, know nothing about business, know nothing about the market, and they don't care about it. To them, the customer is most important. Fuck the companies, but when you fuck the companies, they can't really serve the customer, so then they got to do funky things to stay in business, which fucks the customer, which gets you into a whole circle jerk of maybe you should have supported the market a bit more and were a little bit less naive about the entire thing. With my Neo TTRPG system, I took all this into account. It's a very challenging game, but there are rewards, there is stimulation, but you got to earn it. Nothing is free, but nothing is impossible. That's the difference. It's not going to be a meat grinder. It's not going to be that way. Can it be dangerous? Can it be all the things you're afraid of? Yes, it can bring the negative elements to you, but in a way that is meant to make it exciting, not to be overwhelming and have all the negative effects continuously happen to you. The game doesn't spend its time tripping you up at every corner, hoping you get a little bit of a breakthrough and get somewhere. My aim is to simply do it right, but with a better gaming system than WotC, right? Like, that was my aim, and I've achieved that. Or I'll claim to have achieved that with the Neo TTRPG system. But you got to have the knowledge, and the only way to have this knowledge about why TSR failed and what you should do is to accept how TSR failed, because if you don't accept how it failed, it's hard to even see what I'm talking about. Once you understand that all that grindy gameplay really turned off over 90% of TSR customers, even before 2nd edition AD&D ever hit the market, you understand why it all collapsed. TSR AD&D 1st edition is not bad, and it has a minority cult following. But if it were more forgiving, if that was the experience, and there were more high-level gaming, right? You combine those two things, that was more like the experience most people were having with the system. That system would have been successful going into the future. What kills it is that break your legs, break your legs, break your legs, and you're never really rewarded, because the reward would be fighting the dragon successfully under the sun and being excited and playing heroes in that way. 99% of people never had that experience. Even the people that have dedicated themselves to that game will say, like, if they fought a dragon, it might have been once, right? It's just not that often, not the thing that happens all the time. And I know a lot of old hats that will still play AD&D 1st edition, but at least some of the guys privately will admit this stuff. Like, yeah, it's a grind, yeah, it's all this. You're not wrong. I'm like, well, then you understand why it drove most people away. It's like, yeah. There's just not many old school guys that accept the truth. A bunch of them are AD&D 1st edition fans, and they'll deny it. They'll say 2nd edition caved in the company. The company was in full collapse before 2nd edition ever came out. 2nd edition was an attempt at making a product to save the company. Understand that, right? It's 2nd edition is them putting their money in an attempt where their mouth is by taking a big risk to keep the company going. If you fail the risk, the company is going to collapse because you just don't have the money to keep going. You're in the rig, you're hitting, so they took a shot. Now, they could have just sold it off or gave up and walked away with a bit of money before 2nd edition ever came out. But they went at it. I'll give them that. They went at it. They just went at it in a terrible way, right? They didn't realize dedicated customers were already gone. And that's, you're going to cave in from losing dedicated customers. There's some customers that can buy every game. That's a tiny minority back in the day, right? Again, when you lose these customers, these dedicated customers, now they're buying all the Palladium games, or now they're buying all the stuff that goes to Vampire. They're not going to buy 2nd edition and all the splat books, right? That's what happened. So I think 2nd edition was a brilliant fucking game in many ways. But it came into a company that was in collapse, and no matter what we did, we just couldn't save it. Not with second edition, but second edition by no means was dead. And it was so good that unlike AD&D first edition and original D&D, even after TSR folded, second edition remained the majority TTRPG anybody played for years. Like, it remained quite successful. And the reason second edition actually maintained its success, unlike AD&D first edition, was you could succeed more. It was letting you win 30 or 40% of the time. Okay, so there you go. That's what I did with my Neo TTRPG system. If you want to succeed, the players have to be able to succeed. And not in a cheap, shallow way. It has to be real for them. You don't want to manipulate them in some negative way, but you want them to know the game is meant to be challenging. They got to earn the reward, but the reward is not so fucking impossible. There are some that are going to be quite challenging to get through a wall to get to that reward, but it's not every reward. And a lot of old school gaming, every reward was going through a wall. The most minor thing you would do that would almost do nothing for you, would take you forever. Imagine you're going to make a fucking potion in the game. It takes you 3 months to make a fucking cure potion that you use it once, you barely notice the effects, and it becomes a waste of time. That was sort of the outcome of old school D&D right there. A lot of wasting your time for very little. All restricting, keeping you on your knees the entire time. If they would have told people the truth about the experience, that you'd be in a dungeon working like a worker, you're not a hero, you're going to be doing a lot of camping outside to heal up, because we have not made the game where healing is convenient so you can keep going through the dungeon. If you keep going, you're going to die. You have to go out and camp and shit like this. Basically, if the progress would have been better, the experience, but it's all failure. They lied. That was the real experience most people were having. Camping, going through dungeons, not being heroes, not being nothing. And there's a minority of guys that loved it. The majority hated it. That's it. All right. Anyway, I love you, at least most of you for now. Take care.